6 summers ago, I went through one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Or rather, I'm sure it was the most terrifying experience. My brother moved out about 10 years ago. We had always been very close, and when he had to move states for work, it had a big impact on me. So, every year, I made a 6-day trip to visit him. I could shorten the trip to just 1 day by plane, but airplanes always caused me some distress, and I often had earaches. Besides, I loved driving and having those 6 days just for myself. It had become a kind of ritual for me, and one that I was starting to miss. On June 26, 2018, after a stressful week at college, I packed up 2 bags and hit the road. I've always been a creature of habit. Not that I didn't like to challenge myself a bit, but this was a comfort trip, and that's exactly what I wanted and needed. A week to myself, calm and stress-free, away from everything and everyone. That's why I never changed hotels. Since my first trip, I always stayed at the same places. The first 3 days went smoothly, and I was starting to regain my usual self. However, on the 3rd night, upon arriving at the hotel, I found it closed. It hadn't occurred to me to check beforehand. Given its remote location, I often wondered about its profitability. I suppose now I had my answer. Normally, this would have irritated me, but after those peaceful days, I felt resilient enough to adapt my plans. On any other day, I likely would have opted to sleep in the car, a discomfort I had endured before. However, a recent college accident left me with occasional back pain. Though manageable, sleeping in the car would only exacerbate it, especially with 3 more days of driving ahead to reach my brother's place. Therefore, finding an alternative accommodation became imperative. If you study or have studied in the United States, you know that education is criminally expensive, and if you've already taken out a few loans, every coin counts. A cheap hotel would have to do. But before looking for somewhere to stay, I needed to use the bathroom and eat something. I ended up choosing a restaurant that, again, didn't look the best, but was relatively cheap. I decided to ask the man there if he knew of any cheap places to stay for the night. The man wasn't the least bit interested in me, and, in fact, he didn't seem interested in anything at all. He was one of those people you look in the eyes, and it seems like there's nothing behind them. After some time, he finally gave me some directions, and I left. In the car, I searched online for the best option, or rather, the cheapest. I ended up choosing a local lodging that was super cheap, but seemed to have relatively good conditions. Plus, it wasn't just a room. It was a tiny house with a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. There were about 5 similar units, all in a more isolated area of the small town. From what I gathered online, they were all occupied except one. I decided to go there and check it out. I still had some time before it got dark. Upon arrival, I found it to be a quaint place. The houses were all small and identical to each other. They were clustered around a huge cornfield. I wandered around a bit, hoping to find someone, but found no one. After half an hour, I genuinely found it strange and decided to call their contact number. The strange thing wasn't that no one was there to greet me. I hadn't made a reservation or called ahead. The strange thing was that the other houses were supposedly all occupied, but the place looked abandoned. Not abandoned in the sense of being in poor condition or dilapidated, but rather in the sense that there wasn't a soul in sight. A man answered the phone. He explained how everything worked. The house was ready, and all I had to do was deposit the money. Then, I would get a code to open a safe box near the door which had the keys inside. It seemed practical and quick. At least I wouldn't have to interact with anyone else, and could enjoy the rest of my stay to relax. Upon entering the house, everything was in great condition, but a terrible smell emanated from it. It smelled as if it had been closed and abandoned for centuries, or as if some animal had died inside. I decided to open all the windows and let it air out. By nightfall, the smell should have dissipated. I must have been more tired from the journey than I had thought, because as soon as I lay down, I took a nap for 2 hours. It was around 8:15 p.m. when I woke up hungry. It was already dark, and the smell seemed better, so I went to close all the windows. One of them, the bedroom one overlooking the back of the house and the cornfield, was the largest. It was more like a glass door than a window. This was the last one I closed, and as I looked out over the field, a slight movement caught my attention. Was someone or something there? I stared for a moment as my eyes adjusted to the low light outside, until I clearly saw the outline of a figure. Was it one of the other occupants from the other houses? I hadn't seen anyone else there yet. I decided to open the window again and ask who it was. I had to call twice, and the second time louder and more aggressively for the person to realize I wasn't kidding. He eventually showed up and approached me. He was a relatively small man with a peculiar face. You know when you think someone looks shady? This man looked exactly like that. Shady. He apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare me and was just doing maintenance on the electrical cables. That seemed extremely odd to me. He was standing there on the outskirts of the cornfield where there were no electrical cables. Also, that afternoon when I spoke to the lodging owner, he didn't mention anything about someone coming for maintenance. Despite the odd situation, there was nothing threatening about it, so I apologized and closed the window again. But before doing so, I glanced at the other houses. It was getting late, and the other people should have arrived by now. But there was nothing in that landscape to indicate that was the case. Everything was quiet, and there wasn't a single person or light to be seen. Was the website outdated? I made a mental note to ask the man about it the next day. Not that it would make much difference, but I wanted to know. I went back to the kitchen and started preparing a small dinner. I was starting to get hungry. After dinner, I looked out the window again. I just wanted to confirm if the man was still there. He was, this time much closer to the house and simply staring at it. What the heck? That's when I started to feel visibly disturbed. I hadn't seen him move a single cable or do anything else. He was just staring at my house. Since he must have seen me looking, I decided not to raise any suspicion and waved at him. After all, it might have been an uncomfortable situation, but I didn't think the man was trying to harm me. I was twice his size and at least 3 times stronger. I didn't feel physically threatened, but I felt uncomfortable. I did another round of the house to close all the windows, doors, and curtains, then decided to take a shower. I was in the middle of the shower when I heard a loud noise, as if something had fallen or broken. But the sound of water pouring over my head distorted the sound, so I couldn't tell what it was. I couldn't even tell if it came from inside or outside the house. I quickly wiped my eyes and stayed alert. I think we can all relate to this feeling. Being home alone in the shower with your eyes completely closed. I can't quite explain it, but it's a moment of universal vulnerability. The next few minutes were completely calm. I listened carefully, waiting for any other sounds, but heard nothing. I finished my shower, keeping my eyes wide open and avoiding the water. When I returned to the bedroom, everything seemed perfectly in place. There wasn't a single noise, and all the windows were still closed. The noise must have come from outside. Perhaps one of the other residents had finally arrived, or maybe the maintenance man had actually done something. It had been about 2 hours since I first saw him. It would be very strange if he were still around, especially at that late hour. I discreetly peeked out the window and saw nothing. The other houses were completely dark, and there was no sign of the man. A wave of relief washed over me. He must have left by now. I settled into bed and picked up my book. I had made it a habit to read at least a few pages every day, and I felt that this habit had been crucial not only for my personal development, but also for my mental well-being. I must have read about 10 pages when I thought I heard footsteps. Nothing very noticeable, but clearly footsteps from someone close to the window of my bedroom. The discomfort returned, and I decided it was time to call the landlord. It was already too late, and I knew there was a chance he wouldn't answer or would hang up, but I had nothing to lose. He answered, and I immediately noticed he sounded flustered. I asked him if someone was supposed to come for electrical cable maintenance. He said yes, but in a completely whispered voice, as if he didn't want others to overhear him speaking. He might have already been in bed and didn't want to wake anyone sleeping next to him. I was thinking about this when I realized that in certain words he spoke, I seemed to hear an echo, but it wasn't any echo. It was him speaking from outside my house. The man who rented me the space for the night and the one who was supposedly doing maintenance were the same person. Something was very wrong, and if I had been suspicious until that moment, I now realized something was definitely amiss. I decided to stay calm and not let on that I was suspicious. I hung up and thanked him, saying how nice the place was and how happy I was with it. When you're in danger and adrenaline kicks in, you always find the extra strength to lie convincingly. I still didn't know what his plan was, but I knew I had to get out of there as soon as possible. My back could handle a rough night in the car, and staying in that house any longer felt too dangerous. Although I had a physical advantage over the man, this was the United States, where guns are easy to come by. I didn't know what kind of weapons he might have. If he had a gun and intended to harm me, my strength wouldn't matter. I had to think carefully about my next move. He hadn't been aggressive yet, and there was no clear threat. But he certainly had a key to the house. If he wanted to enter, he could do so easily. There had to be a reason he hadn't made a move yet. Either he was just a creep with no harmful intentions, or he was waiting for me to fall asleep. I couldn't risk letting that happen. Since I was only staying there for one night, I never unpacked my bags, so I was ready to leave. I gathered my remaining belongings like my wallet and left everything by the door. I headed to the kitchen to get some water. When you're stressed and full of adrenaline, your mouth tends to go dry. That's when I realized I had already finished all the water I brought with me. The only thing left was beer. I wasn't worried about the beer affecting me since I have a good tolerance for alcohol, but I wanted to be completely alert and at my best physically and mentally. So, I decided to drink a glass of tap water. Bad move. I'm not sure what was in that water, but whatever it was, my body didn't agree with it. Within 15 minutes, I started feeling sick, dizzy, and my physical strength fading. I attempted to reach the door, but feeling faint, I retreated to bed instead. I was too weak to open the door in that condition. I wasn't certain if there were spare keys and if the man could enter. But at that moment, it seemed I might collapse either on the floor or the bed. The bed seemed the most practical choice. The last thing I remembered was collapsing onto the bed like dead weight. When I woke up, I still felt lightheaded. Glancing at the wall clock, it read 5 a.m. What I saw next defied words. Sleeping beside me under the sheets was the man. My brain processed the sight in an instant, and instinct took over. Without hesitation, I lifted both legs to waist height and hurled him off the bed with all my strength. I swiftly grabbed my belongings by the door and sprinted to the car as fast as I could, despite still feeling somewhat off. Adrenaline surged through me, propelling me there in mere seconds, I think. Near danger, you always summon extra strength. I left without glancing back, and the next morning, I filed a police report. I've never revisited that area since, and the happiness of that journey was forever marred. From then on, I make sure to fly whenever I visit my brother.